Today we are honored to welcome Karen Canham to the show today. I'm very excited about this. She talks about some amazing topics that are really important, right? The show, again, we're always talking about becoming the greatest versions of ourselves and all about personal development. And she talks a lot about resilience, right? And kind of overcoming obstacles and basically creating a positive culture, right? Because I believe that our environment is so important. Like, of course, like our environment's going to have impact on us. We also have impact on it, right? So just being able to work within those dynamics is so key. Just so many valuable insights. Again, very happy to have her on, share her work with us. And yeah, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So I'm very curious to hear your story and how you got into everything that you're doing to help people in terms of resilience, work culture, and everything like that.
Yeah, so my whole story started when I was a kid, environmental trauma. So I love that you mentioned that because the environmental piece is a huge part of my work. And I developed an eating disorder, anorexia, to cope with that environment. And I'll keep the short story briefer than what it was, but I did not go and get help for that eating disorder until I was an adult in my late 20s. And that was when I first realized that I had been numb for a very long time. I had been operating on autopilot. I really had no idea what was going on in my body. I was making decisions from a place that was not grounded or regulated. And my journey really started with like that therapy of starting just to gain some awareness. But with that, I was introduced to yoga, and that practice really changed my life. That was the one thing that got me into my body, that felt safe for me to be into my body, because I will say that a lot of us in society, just how we're structured, how the whole society is structured, is we're really not taught to be in our bodies, and so it can be a very uncomfortable feeling. And yoga was kind of my gateway to get into that and really help me heal from that eating disorder. Along the way, there was lots of other things that I learned in terms of like tools and taking care of myself, whether it was mindfulness, CBT, meditation, energy work. I mean, the list goes on and on. And I started teaching yoga myself, and with that, it kind of evolved into me coaching people. I was doing that on the side while I continued to climb the corporate ladder. And I was still kind of stuck in this, it's important that I have a certain title or I make a certain amount of money. And it wasn't until later in life and at a career point that I was at, that I was like, hold up a second, like, what am I doing here? Although I loved a lot of what I was able to do in my corporate career because I oversaw territories, and a lot of what I was able to do was coach the humans, there was a lot of things that weren't aligned with who I was. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to switch full time into my coaching business. And from there, I really focused in on the things that I saw the biggest transformations in myself and in the clients that I was working with, which led me into more of a holistic type of approach, looking at nutrition, looking at this neurosomatics piece, which is really huge. So when we talk about wellness, there's so many different things that are out there, and depending on the person, depends on what works for us and what doesn't. And we really need to be able to find what works for us. It also can feel really overwhelming with all the things that are out there and thrown at us, and all the things that we're supposed to be doing to feel well. So just working with, hundreds and hundreds of clients throughout these years, what I really found is it's not, these tools are really helpful, so don't get me wrong, but it really is a shift of how we show up, and that really comes down to this nervous system work. And how we do that is by first being able to get into that body and listen to what our body is trying to tell us. And then we're able to go deeper and deeper and have a better understanding of ourselves, and then respond differently based off of what's happening in our body.
Absolutely. I love it. Thanks for sharing that. So it sounds like the eating disorder was kind of like a coping mechanism, and you kind of learned these different tools in a sense to kind of get out of that. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yoga was like a really powerful tool. And he became an instructor and learning all these tools. Like I kind of noticed how that goes in a sense. It's like we have these stories that we have to overcome, and then we learn all these things, and then coming on the other side of that, being a model and just being of service to others. So I commend you for that for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
feel blessed to be able to do what I do.
yeah, I mean, it definitely is a blessing, because like we're in this hard state, but then once you get to the other side of that, you see possibility. It's very inspiring as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I do is just, helping people that it doesn't have to be the way that it is currently for them, and there is a different way of being.
Absolutely. So you mentioned nervous system regulation. Can you define what that is and perhaps why we're out of balance and maybe some things we can do to get back in balance?
Yeah, so I explain this on a scale of 1 to 10. And when we think about the 1, it's more of this shutdown type of energy. We can also say that is like the dorsal state that we're in. And when we think about being in 10, that would be your sympathetic state or highly anxious or really pushing through. There's lots of reasons why we can develop in being in these places. And two of the main things from what my studies have taught me and from what I've learned working with clients is that a lot of the things are developed when we are children. This is age 3 to 7 is when we start to really learn how to cope. And, part of what I learned how to cope with was this eating disorder, but behind that there was like perfectionism that was setting in. And it can be many different things. It can be overachieving. It can be a lot of different things of things that are happening in our environment. And so that's how we learn how to cope with these certain things. These parts start to form. The other piece of it is just, it's kind of, I'll go back to the society thing that I see a lot of is like we're taught to strive and to be a certain way and to have certain things by a certain point in our life. And so there's just these pressures that are around us where we start to become not aligned with who we truly are. And I talk about being on the scale of 1 to 10. When we're in the middle is that regulation piece. And I really like to point out is it is normal for us to be in all of these different places. So we will be more shut down sometimes. We will be more heightened sometimes and anxious. It's when we get stuck there and it becomes chronic that it really becomes a problem for us. And so all the work that I do is really centered around bringing yourself back into that regulation place and also being able to expand how large that regulation area is. So you may come to me and it may be on that scale. You might have a tiny little sliver of area that feels like regulation to you. And we start to, we can do this in different ways, but one of the examples that we would is start to dip your toe into experiences that may have caused you to get into this really sympathetic state. And we can start to train the body to feel safe when we start to feel in those ways. So the more that we can do that, the more that we expand that window of what we're able to tolerate. So that's really one of the biggest pieces is what we're working for in the work that I do. The other biggest piece is to go deeper and to understand why maybe I'm triggered to go into these different types of states. And this goes back to what we were talking about with the communication piece and the corporate work that I do, is this understanding piece of why I may be triggered in a certain way and I'm going into like this shutdown state. The more we understand ourselves, the more we're able to feel what that feels like in our body and be able to respond differently. So a lot of what's happening is we're responding from our brain and our body has already told us what's happening. So our body responds first and then our mind responds. And most of us are waiting until it gets into our mind to make changes. And we usually try to overpower what our mind is telling us. Mindset work is helpful. But if we don't address what's happening in the body, then there's only so far that we can get. And I can explain this in a way of that our vagus nerves runs from the bottom of our brain through our body and it's acting like a loop, carrying information from the body to the brain and the brain to the body. 80% of that communication is coming up from the body, and only 20% is coming down from the brain. So if we keep trying to work on the brain and override what's happening in the brain, the body starts to be like, hello, 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 hello. And this is where we can get into these chronic places of either shutting down or being highly in this like anxious sympathetic state. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, those are some profound insights for sure. I love that. It sounds like we tend to get in a state of overwhelm, right? And we use these coping tools because that's kind of all we have available, right? We don't really know a better way in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's been conditioned for a really long time. Like I said, a lot of these patterns that have developed within us when we were a child in that 3 to 7 range. That isn't always the case, but most of the time that is the case, where how far back we're talking about that these things developed. So now we're trying to, and your brain has worked that way, and your neurotransmitters have responded in that way of like, oh, when I feel this, this is what this means. And so it's really trying to rework those circuits into a lot of safety. So when I talked about like dipping our toe into these experiences that might have felt like uneasy for us, and exploring why that was uneasy and exploring what that really felt like in the body, we are able to increase that capacity, and we start to then create more safety into our body. And that's why we're able to expand that window that feels safe for us to operate in.
Absolutely. How can we start to become aware of these patterns and see how they're affecting us and potentially how we can move out of them more gracefully?
It really depends on where you're at, and that could be at any given moment, or it could just be like, more of like a chronic type of thing. Most of the people that I do work with have done some type of work in the past, have done therapy, have tried a lot of different modalities, and so there's a capacity there to be able to really do that body work. However, I will even say, even with people who have done a lot of that type of work, there's still a place of where we need to start slow and start titrating, because if we don't start slow and we go too quickly, that'll throw our nervous system off as well. So one of the things that I really like to tell people in general and in the beginning is this is not something that we need to add to our plate. It's not like adding an exercise routine or adding a yoga class or adding, a mindfulness practice. This is something that we are incorporating into our everyday life and just like a way of being. And so one of the things that I really like to tell people is, when you're in the shower, and we can almost think of this as a mindfulness practice of being in that moment, feeling your feet on the floor, feeling the soap on your body, feeling the water run over your head. And we can start to even get more curious about that. What's the temperature of the water? How does that affect my body? Do I feel a tingling sensation? All of this sensation work, it starts to create safety in that body, saying like, okay, I'm here, I'm present, I'm safe in this moment, because a lot of what's happening when we're not doing that is we're somewhere else. Our brain is in the past, in a past situation, subconsciously. Usually that's what the case is, or it can be like projecting into the future based off of those past experiences as well.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're creating an anchor. Is that right?
Yeah, it creates an anchor, it creates groundedness. That really is the first step in doing this work. And even if you've been doing the work for a while and you come into a session, we want to be able to find an anchor point that is like a safety point to you, to always be able to come back to that anchor and that safety.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just because when we're state of dysregulation, it can be difficult, and just being able to have these practices that we go towards, in a sense, that we're kind of more familiar with, and we kind of almost develop a relationship with, and it's much easier to regulate, I find.
Yeah, yes, you're absolutely correct. And these parts of us that we become more familiar with, I like to point out too that the goal is to not make them go away. The goal is to become more aware of when they show up, why they show up, are they still serving a purpose for me, and then not allow them to take over.
Definitely. Sounds like to be more integrated and just be more whole in a sense, because you notice that you kind of expand your capacity. That's what you mentioned. And that's what makes sense. It's because we're still kind of in the situation, but we're kind of being able to be more resilient and just being able to handle more in a sense.
Exactly. And that capacity word, some people are like, oh, I don't want to add anything else to my plate. What I mean by capacity is expanding what we're able to handle, which ultimately gives us, you can kind of think of it as a rubber band. Like if our rubber band is that a good analogy? We want to be able to bounce back quickly, right? So if the rubber band is like really pulled far apart and we let go, we'll bounce back to that center fairly quickly. And that's a good thing. That's what we want to be able to do. And we want to be able to like be in these places when they're happening. So if I'm actually in this place of like this sympathetic place, I want to be able to like be in it and allow it to be taking place and unfolding and feel the sensations that are going on with me, instead of being like, I'm going to disassociate from this feeling, and I might, add some coping skills in there to be able to like not feel.
Definitely, yeah. You had mentioned somatic therapy. Can you explain what that is and some modalities that it kind of involves?
Yeah, the somatic therapy or exercising, some experiencing, the somatic piece is about feeling into the sensations. And we can do this in many different ways. It can be something that's really specific, that we're just going to practice and we're going to feel into our foot, and we're going to go through all the 5 senses in our foot specifically. It can be something of, there's a certain thing that is going on in my current life, and I want to feel where I feel that specific thing happening. So I had, an example could be of like, I got into an argument with my spouse, and I want to recognize where do I feel that in my body, and then go through all the sensations of that. So there's different ways of doing somatic experiencing, but ultimately it's about being in your body and feeling into those sensations, which again creates safety and starts to expand our capacity.
Absolutely. You had mentioned resilience and how it's really kind of the state of bouncing back quickly. Like I noticed that as well. It's like, because things are going to happen, but how can we be more fast and coming back to center, right? Coming back to the strong state and state of resilience. I think that's so key. Would you define it like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, a big piece of that somatic experience is developing that resilience, because the more that we are able, there's a lot that's happening. The more that we're able to like stay with these feelings that feel uncomfortable, the more they start to feel not as uncomfortable. They start to feel safer in our body, and then our brain starts to rewire like, okay, this is okay, I'm okay. And then that helps us not react to that certain situation. It helps us to be able to stay in that regulation piece and just get curious about what's going on, and then be able to respond from what we say is your adult authentic self, instead of react to some trigger or part that is taking place.
Yeah, that makes sense. So like the key is to feel, because if you can't feel, you can't heal. That's what I like to say. It's like, because we're kind of experiencing these emotions, we don't know how to handle it in a sense, and we can't really get to the root of the issue until we can kind of fully express that in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And ultimately, my experience was when I first started my journey into healing, I had to use a feelings wheel. And it really starts with like those basic feelings of like sadness and anger. And then they expand out so you can deepen your vocabulary of like, well, I'm angry, but I'm actually irritated. And then you can go deeper and deeper. So that's really important to be able to identify those feelings in the first place. And then we take it a step further of like, where is that feeling actually showing up in the body? And that's usually, again, that step tends to be even more uncomfortable. And we go through the sensations of what is this feeling? What happens with this feeling? What color is it? What am I feeling on my body when I feel that? Are there visuals that are coming into place? Because when we can do that, we can recognize that feeling much quicker. And that feeling starts in the body. So by the time that feeling gets up to the brain, it's already been stewing in your body, and it's already starting to create kind of that chain reaction. So the quicker that we can get to it, the more we can respond with regulation.
Yeah, it sounds like having that emotional awareness, right? Like, what are we actually experiencing? What are we feeling? And awareness is the first step to change. Is becoming aware of that can be so impactful, I find.
So impactful for not only awareness of ourselves, but awareness of other people can help us to respond with that compassion too. When we do this work, we learn how to map our systems and map other people's systems. And that really helps us to respond with compassion and not respond with defensiveness, for example, or reacting from our own trigger because we think that person is doing something to us. Yeah, and that awareness piece, it goes a step deeper because a lot of people have a lot of awareness, but they struggle with then making that behavioral change along with that awareness. So that parts work really is the one I feel like in the work that we do that really starts to make that shift into that behavioral change. And then it's just like a different way of showing up in the world.
Yeah, I definitely can see that can kind of add to our compassion, right? Because if you know yourself in a sense, it's so much easier to kind of know someone else and be able to kind of, have grace for other people as well. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
So back to resilience. We mentioned it a little bit, but how can we start to develop this within ourselves? Because it's such a key aspect of reality, is being a strong individual, right? And there's so many tools that go into that, but like, what can we start to do if we're just starting that journey?
I'll go back to depending, again, it really depends on the person and where they're at in their specific season of life and all the things that they've done in the past, right? But a lot of people, again, what I see and where we start is just being mindful in that moment of what I'm doing and starting to take it a step further of like, what are all these sensations that are going on when I'm taking a shower or I'm taking a walk or I'm driving my car. That really is the first step to be able to start regulating that system. And then it goes all the way into where we move into this deeper work of starting to uncover when did these parts of me develop, why did they develop, and being able to start to look at them in a different way. We do, in terms of these parts, we're talking to them in a way that is very compassionate. We're looking at them as something that is a part of us, but it's not who we really are. And then we can do work around like healing those parts of us that have been there for a long time. So all of that combined, and there's lots of like in between, will start to expand that capacity of what you're able to handle and then be able to snap back quicker into that regulation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Something I've been contemplating lately is like becoming a skilled learner, right? Because in the realm of personal development, like you start your path, you're going to come up against ideas that you don't necessarily agree with, things that may challenge you in a sense. And what I find is that a lot of people, we just tend to kind of like that's it, right? It's like we come up against this thing and we just stop, right? And what we do is we kind of impede our own learning, right? And I'm bringing this up because I think it's kind of an analogy to life. Like we kind of come up against these challenges, but if we can change our perspective a little bit and see how we can potentially utilize this in our own lives, our own growth, it kind of makes it more inspirational to kind of do that thing. Because it can be challenging in the beginning and we don't really have these reasons, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what I think I hear you saying, and I love that you said, and then we stop, because this is what happens a lot throughout our lifetime, and then we can get in this place of like very disconnected from who we truly are. And these stopping points are usually happening because we're experiencing something uncomfortable that's happening inside of us. And so it's a protection that's kind of like shutting us down or taking us back into this place that's been comfortable for a long time. And it's not necessarily, it's serving you a purpose in that moment, but it may not be serving you well anymore. And so there's a couple things that can be happening there. Is it's either a part that's showing up, whether it's like I'm not good enough or I'm going to fail, whatever it is, right? And then there's also could be, and again, a lot of this would come back to a part two, but if we start to feel that feeling of like anxiety, then that would be like I'm gonna shy away from that because that feeling feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of us are walking around and we're really ruled by these parts of us that have developed, and again, they developed for protection purposes, and most of what is happening now in our adult life is they really aren't serving us anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Also, like along with that, it's like if we disagree with that idea, and we just say that's it, it's like we're losing so much because they can have so much value in something else, in a sense. So it's kind of like being curious about how we feel and like what's trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of that part's work is talking to it and understanding why are you here? Why did you develop? Why are you here right now? What do you need to tell me? Do you still feel like you need to be around? Or even when we're doing this, your adult self can come in and say like, yeah, I hear you and I understand you, but I got this now. And I know that you're there, and I thank you for doing all the things that you've done for me in the past. But you can take a back seat. I'm in the driver's seat now. I got it.
Yeah. It's like being mindful of that self-talk, like doing it in a graceful manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really important, that piece of it in this work is to be graceful and be appreciative for all of these parts of us that made us who we are. Because getting into a place of like shame is a huge one. That's not going to help us to heal. And so it's really developing this different way of like communicating within ourselves internally. Yeah.
100%. So you also talk about work culture and how that can be improved in a sense, because I just feel like the culture around, we can definitely kind of choose the trajectory of our lives. Because if we're kind of around this negative energy, it can definitely affect our performance, everything that goes into. So just, I feel like being a light is the first step, like you're the first step, and then kind of like going from there. You want to speak to that?
I totally agree, because we cannot control what other people do. However, I will say that we can regulate the environment around us. So if we are showing up in our regulated place, then that energy is going to ripple off into other people, and then they're more likely to be in that regulated place as well. So that's one piece of it. Yeah, the other piece is that, yeah, I mean, that's mainly it. I can't agree with you more that it is so important that the leaders in our world understand this type of work, and understand themselves. That really is the work, in my opinion, for being a leader. Of course, like leaders in corporations, they need to know certain things about their industry and things like that. But the ultimate piece is this leadership piece of really taking ownership of yourself and being communicating from this regulated place and being able to hold that space, and co-regulate with these other people. And so it just goes down and down and down into that corporation.
It's so powerful, because like it just speaks to how we're the creators of our reality, in a sense. Because like the more empowered we are, the more like we can be of service to other people. And it's so like empowering once we really understand that, because like the outside circumstances don't control us. It's really how we respond to them, in a sense.
Exactly. Exactly. And we do have a lot of this work is about taking your power back, and learning how to operate from an empowered place. And, you know, I was picturing when you were talking as someone who's like running a company, and I've worked in a lot of different companies, and it's like there's so much work that needs to be done at that level to stay in that regulated place and to come from that regulated place, because when they're not, it affects the whole system, and then you just have like a domino effect.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of work culture, like we have that positive vibe going, but like what can we do to influence people in a sense to help them be on their greatest versions as well, so we can kind of have this amazing company?
Yeah, again, it's doing this work yourself so that you're able to show up in this place of regulation. And I kind of hesitate to keep using that word regulation because, again, it's normal for us to be in all these different states. It's a lot of what we talked about so far of like having the awareness of when I'm not in these states, why are these things happening, being able to bring us back and not communicating or making behavioral choices and taking actions from these other places. It's making those decisions from that place of regulation, which is clarity, connection, communication, all of those things that help start to regulate people around us. So if I'm in an environment where someone is heightened and they're communicating to me from a reactive type of place, that's going to cause my system to not feel safe. And so my system's going to respond in some way that's not healthy either. So as a leader, the most important thing to do is and again, it's normal for us not to always feel regulated, but it's having that awareness and then being able to pause before we respond or before we're communicating or before we're like showing up for other people, that we're able to come from a regulated place.
Amazing. So it sounds like it can help us make these better decisions as well, like these more empowering decisions with clarity and like speed in a sense when we have that sense of regulation.
Exactly. Exactly. A lot of clients that I work with, they'll come to the realization of like, oh my gosh, how much energy have I been wasting of like being in these like states that I'm in, whether I'm like heightened or I'm like shut down, and it's just like a total suck of not just my energy, but then I don't have clarity. I work with a lot of business owners as well. I don't have clarity of like what step I should take next. And yeah, I mean, it really is very eye-opening and brings a lot of energy back into the system of being able to spend most of your time in this regulated place. And then you're aligned with who you truly are as an adult. And I like to kind of think of it as like, now we're in a flow. We're flowing with like who we truly are. And a lot of us have felt that way when we can think back when we were like really young. We felt that way. We felt free. We were, it's like we're floating in the wind. We're going with the flow. And then all of these things happen and we start to become like rigid. And and then we start to learn like how to bring that flow back in and flow through these states that we experience. Because you're right, like you said earlier, it's not about living a life in this like positive mental state and like nothing ever is going to happen, because it's life and it's real and a lot of things are going to happen. It's how we respond to them that makes the huge difference in the way that we are as a
Absolutely.
human.
Yeah, when we have that sense of clarity, it's so much easier to be on purpose, right? And be inspired because we're not operating out of this low energy state. We're so much easier to kind of elevate and be of service and have this sense of freedom.
Exactly. Exactly. It's very difficult to hold space, as I like to say, or you can think of that as just like showing up for other humans when we're in these places of dysregulation.
Yeah. Are there any other tools that come to mind for you when it comes to nervous system regulation? Like, I know we talked about somatic therapy, but is there any other things that you really like to go to in order to self-regulate and be more empowered?
I love breath work. Um, Excuse me. I've done a lot of breath work. I went through a pretty intensive breath work certification. Breath work can be more comfortable to people to start to get into their bodies. And there's also a lot of change that happens internally with our brain and our organs and all those things as we breathe. And there's many different breathing techniques that we can use based upon what we're trying to achieve. Other things that I like to use are called Neuro tools. So these are things that will specifically stimulate the vagus nerve. So these are tools that I use when I cannot get myself or a client can't get themselves back into this regulation. It can help to bring safety back into the body. A lot of those tools are things that were like massaging our earlobes, for example, and or there's other ear techniques that we can do of like pulling up on the top. We're using eye movements. So I don't know like if you've heard or there's big out there now about EMDR, and that's a specific therapy that you can do that's all about eye movements and desensitization. And that would be a neural tool that specifically is targeting that vagus nerve as well. And so there's lots of different ways that we can use the eyes and these specific neuro tools that will stimulate the vagus nerve. And basically what that means is that the vagus nerve, I can't remember if I said this in this conversation, so it runs from the bottom of your brain into your body and almost hits all of your major organs in your body. And it's a loop. So it's giving information from your brain to your body and then your body back to your brain. And 80% of that communication is coming up from the body, where 20% is coming down from the brain into the body. And so this is partly why that body work, I'll go back to all the body work we were talking about, is so important. But that vagus nerve is what we are stimulating with those specific tools, and it's just giving it awareness, and it's creating, we can think of it as like if we're doing a bicep curl, that bicep curl is being worked. It's the same thing when we utilize these tools, that vagus nerve is being worked, and it's bringing it back into this place of like feeling safe, and that it can operate kind of like on all cylinders, right?
Yeah. You mentioned that breath work. It's so key to regulate nervous system because it's something we kind of always have available to us. And as we start to develop that skill of mindful breathing, and like there's so many tools that go in along with that, it's like it's such a powerful tool, I find.
Huge. Yeah. So many of us are holding our breaths, breathing in our chest. Just bringing the awareness to the breath can make huge transformations. But yeah, there's so much science around breath work and all the things that it does and how it can really change your body.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like to use cold thermogenesis, like the use of cold water to like kind of like strengthen the vagus nerve and things like that. So super powerful, I find, and just being able to kind of breathe along with it just makes it like the synergy in a sense.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm.
So you also talk about yoga a lot. Is that something that can be beneficial? And like, what are some things that we see when we start doing that?
So I think I mentioned that yoga was my point of entry for being able to feel into my body. I don't currently teach yoga anymore. I'll use some of what I'll use some yoga with my clients, but I don't like teach to the masses anymore that I used to. I'm a huge believer in yoga. I mean, there's a lot of philosophy behind yoga as well that is the same types of things that I'm talking about. It's just talked about in a different language. And so my interest in yoga really was never about the physical practice. I always told my students, like, I don't really care what your alignment is. I just if it doesn't feel good, don't do it. Don't hurt yourself. But it was more about the philosophy behind yoga and the principles that it carried. Yoga is so helpful in so many different ways, of not just getting in the body, but the values that it holds can really be a healing experience for people. And it was at that point and still is how I carry myself through life.
Yeah. Such a powerful tool for sure. Just being able to kind of find the things that work for us and utilize them, right? Because like as we can see, there's so many tools out there, but find the ones that resonate with us and kind of learning from that. It's always a process, which makes it fun and enjoyable too.
Yeah, exactly. And it changes and over time and can kind of come back full circle too. But yes, there's so many things that are out there. It's just finding what works for you.
Yeah. It sounds like the philosophy of yoga, like a lot of these things, what we're doing is we're training our minds, right? Training our minds. And because as you mentioned before, it's like the mind body connection. It's so real. And just being able to kind of learn how everything is connected. And a lot of times when we work together in synergy, we just become more powerful individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I really understood that through my yoga training like I do now, what that mind body connection is. But yeah, there's so many principles that yoga teaches that, again, are more of like a psychology type of approach that really help us just show up in a different way of being.
Absolutely. So you're also a wellness coach, and that's something that's super impactful. I mean, I would imagine like having resilient systems and just being healthy, like having all these things dialed in, like it's so much easier to regulate and just be kind of resilient as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to point out like this work that I do and what I focus in on. There is still other work that I do as well that I would say this is advanced type of work that I do. If we don't have like the foundations in place of like nutrition, sleep, movement, those types of things, it will be very difficult to do this type of work. And if we do this type of work with this nervous system type of work and we're not doing these other things, it's not going to land nearly as well. I'm not going to say you wouldn't get benefits out of it, but we really need to start with that foundation of those pieces. And they're crucial, yeah.
Because I notice some people wish I do everything with our mind, right? We just kind of like, we don't understand how all these things influence each other. Like, how do we expect to feel well if we're not eating well, or no, we're not sleeping, we're not moving? Like, it's kind of like, once you understand this, it's like, it makes it so much easier, and that makes everything more graceful in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to a lot of this, like what we've been conditioned in our society to do, right? Is to keep pushing and overriding and thinking positively and stuffing things down. And, those things will catch up to you. And then your point of like not doing like the basic things. I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but I know a lot of schools, it was like, oh, you don't have to take PE anymore. It's not required, right? And it's like, just like a basic thing that we need to, it's more important that you're like in all these like STEM classes and don't worry about like your physical activity. And I'm not trying to like beat up on like systems, but it really is like, in my opinion, like an epidemic of the way that we're thinking. The Eastern world thinks very differently than like what we think. And when I talk to people in the Eastern world, it's like, yeah, we learned all this stuff in school. Like in, elementary, high school, it was part of like the way that they were, I think it's much more so now in the Western world it is. And I actually had like a yoga program that developed K through 8 in this school, and it was about philosophy too. It's not like we were just doing the asanas, we were doing all the 8 limbs of yoga. in this whole program. And so I think that there is a shift and there's much better understanding. But yeah, I mean, the more we can get this awareness out there of you and me and everybody else in this work, it really starts to make huge shifts.
Absolutely. So if people, or we're just learning this, like we want to be on our journey, like what do you recommend to people to start to take control of their wellness in a sense? Like if someone's come to you, like where would you have them start?
I was going to say, well, meeting with a wellness coach would be a really good first step. I have an intake process that I do. Again, most of like the individual clients that I work with in my personal business, I'm specifically focused on more of this nervous system type of work. I will implement other things if I see them like needing that, or they've specifically mentioned like, hey, I really want to be able to like work on my nutrition, and I see like these certain things are like my struggles, right? However, there's other people that I work with that are like I'm contracted with where like that is all we really work on is this. It could even be like a nervous system issue that they have, but we're starting with the basics of like nutrition, sleep, movement, stress reduction. And it's important that you find someone that you connect with, first of all, and that you feel comfortable having these harder conversations with, that you can totally be yourself. It's also important that that wellness coach that you're working with does like a thorough intake process. So just like if you were going to go have surgery, they ask you lots and lots of questions. That should be the case too when you hire a wellness coach, so that that coach has a really understanding of what it is that's going on with you holistically, and that they're able to put a plan in place together specifically for you.
Yeah, find someone that resonates with you. It's real important.
Yeah, real important.
Yeah, I mean, the body like is designed to be well, and oftentimes we just have to get out of the way, right? It's like having these empowering beliefs that we're designed to be healthy. I mean, I think that's a foundational step. Like I always like to say, the mind is the foundation, and because that's how we make our decisions, right? It's like we can make such an impact, but we first have to kind of like have agency over mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah. I think a lot of what's happening is the world is moving at a faster rate than it ever has in the past with change. There's so much change. It's just that so much is being thrown at people. And I'm smiling because I think of like my parents who are like, well, it wasn't like this when we raised you as kids, and just how different it is of raising a child in today's age than it was in the 80s, right? So all of those things are real is my point of like things that people have to deal with. Like I have to go to work, because I need to provide for my family from this 9 to 5 job. And then I have to come home and I have to care for my children. And there's it's very complex of like everything that people are going through. And my job as a coach is to start to break down what's getting in the way of being able to do these certain wellness things and not make them overwhelming.
For sure. And also, like, if someone doesn't resonate with us, we can give ourselves permission to change. Like, have someone in alignment with our goals and our values makes the process much more graceful.
Absolutely. It's crucial that you find someone that you're aligned with, yeah, and that you can communicate openly and honestly with.
All right, Karen, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your story with us, your insights, all your valuable knowledge. It's like when we start to learn these things, it's really, really powerful because we can really change our lives. Like being able to be aware of things that I feel like doing this inner work leads to outer results. Like we want all these things in our life, but we have to do that inner work. We have to build that character. We have to overcome these things. And that leads to outer work, which is like whatever we want to do in our lives, like our purpose or things like that. And so I really appreciate you coming on, sharing our insights with us again. It's been really awesome.
Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate it.
So if people would like to get connected with you and your work, where can we find you?
The best place to find me is on my website. It's just KarenAnnWellness.com. you can contact me directly through there, or you can find all my socials on there as well.
Awesome. Thank you.